3 true, scary stalker horror stories. Story 1. In high school, there was a boy named Clemente. It was an uncommon name for my city. Virtually everyone kept their distance from him, except for his 2 friends who were equally unpleasant. In my junior year of high school, I had the misfortune of being assigned to a seat right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the professor to change my seat at the end of class on the first day. Before I could get the chance, Clemente was already starting to bother me. He kept asking all these questions about where I got my bag, my shoes, and my shirt, whether my hair color was natural or dyed, and all of this came from a person but I could smell from 10 feet away. I passed the first period of classes and stayed afterwards to talk to the teacher, but she completely ignored me. She was one of those teachers who never set expectations for anyone or anything. Some seniors had warned me about it before. I thought I'd overlook it instead of having a girl sit next to the jerk with no followers at school all year. But no, it only took a couple of days for Clemente to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I was still walking to and from school. Clement heard about this and took the opportunity to follow me home one day or, as he put it, escort me home to make sure I was safe. Like I haven't been able to take care of myself for the past 2 years. My house was a 15-minute walk from the school. Normally it was a perfect amount of time, and I would spend a good area, a time to relax between responsibilities and clear my head. Clement turned this into an eternal hell. We were in sight, so everyone at school could see us. Most people knew what was going on, but some people really thought I wanted to spend time with him. When I knew I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as possible, which wasn't very pleasant, but even that was too much. It was too late to be rude, because I tried that too, and it didn't work. He found a way to praise everything he said and did, and he kept comparing us and arguing that we were very similar in some way. I was obsessed with the idea that we could be together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but our names don't even look like theirs. The worst part about him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's no surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I set a firm boundary there and almost spat in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have liked it very much. I tried to talk to my counselor about it to see if I could change classes, but it was also useless. He would say things like, "Clement hasn't done anything wrong," which was pretty much useless to me. In early September, we had a 3-day Labor Day weekend. I rebelled about having an extra day away from Clemente, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for the fact that I hadn't been able to reconnect with any of my friends from school, who had no plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that all I wanted to do was lie in bed anyway. I only had one thing planned, which was a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I slept terribly. I was flooded with anxiety for seemingly no reason, and every time I started falling asleep, I would fall straight into a nightmare about Clement. At one point I woke up, and even thought I saw his face in the window. I had a small heart attack, but when I blinked, it went away. Just to make sure, I got up and looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and even put on the blackout curtains that I never use. I couldn't sleep at all after that. I couldn't really decide if what I saw was real or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I'm waking up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider descending toward me on a thread, but when I blink, it disappears before my body wakes up enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to make extra sure that we locked the house properly before we left for the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Clemente and how he had been following me everywhere. Thankfully, at least they cared about me. My dad assured me that I would close the house well, and my mom went even harder by reminding me that I was good with a taser. Then he gave me the small pepper spray bottle from his keychain. It made me feel a little better, but I was still out of my mind throughout the day. My relatives kept asking me if I was okay, and all I could say was yes. We didn't get home until 8 o'clock at night. I grabbed a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure the back door was still locked. Afterward, I went straight to my bedroom and watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I fell asleep. A few minutes later, I woke up but couldn't move. He couldn't breathe either. I was trapped in sleep paralysis. The closest thing I had ever had to a sleep paralysis demon was the hanging spider I mentioned earlier, but there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to breathe, but it was like I'd forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead and looked around my room, but I got nervous because it was darker than usual because of the curtains. Of course, I could clearly see Clemente's face leaning over the edge of my bed. My heart almost shot out, but I still couldn't move. I kept looking at his face, hoping it would go away, praying it was a hallucination, but when I blinked, he didn't go away. He moved. Clement slowly got up and approached me. "Let's have a sleepover," he whispered as he approached my mouth with a strip of duct tape. At the last second, I managed to free myself from the grip of sleep paralysis and screamed as I grabbed the pillow next to me and tucked it into his face. Blindly, he stuck the piece of tape over my mouth, but while he couldn't see what was happening, I quickly reached under the pillow I was sleeping on and grabbed the pepper spray my mother gave me and unlocked the lock as she explained. Then I pointed it directly at his face just as he ripped off the pillow. I fired the spray and it hit him as well as possible, but some of it splashed on me too. We were both incapacitated, but fortunately it only took another 15 seconds for my parents to come running to my room, at which point they made a citizen's arrest until the police arrived. The officers did a search of the house and found damage to the outside of the back door lock, indicating that Clemente had forced the lock. It truly doesn't surprise me at all that picking locks is something he's good at. Clemente was sent to a juvenile detention center for a couple of weeks, and then, through an annoying bureaucratic process, I managed to get him expelled from school. Story 2. I was once in a relationship with the craziest girl I've ever met. I was pretty desperate for love when I thought I fell in love with her. Man, she might have been the hottest girl I'll ever be with, but it wasn't worth it. I realized that it was extremely harmful to me. She spent all my money, pushed all my friends away, and once she had me to herself, she consumed all my free time and drained my life force. I'm not even going into the smallest details about all the little things that make his madness his own kind of special madness. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I finished it in the most humane way possible. I did it in person, in a private place, in my car right in front of his apartment. She cried, screamed, slapped me in the face, threw some things, and caused a huge mess in my car. But no matter what I said, I told her there was no chance I would get back to her. She stormed off at the last thing she said to me before slamming the car door shut. When she would be sorry I had treated her badly. Actually, I'm sorry that I fooled myself into thinking it was a good idea to sleep with her in the first place. Once I left, I felt a surge of relief, as if I had been freed from the spell of an evil witch. I spent the rest of the day doing all the things I could never do when she was around. Then, I called my friends and went to the bar with them for the first time in a month. I told them how it had all happened, and they warned me about something, just as they warned me about the dangers of the mad girls when I first messed with her. "This is not over," they said. "You may have broken up with her, but she isn't done with you." They couldn't have been more right. That same night, as my friends and I left the bar, I went to my car and noticed something in the gutter between the hood and windshield. I took a closer look and pulled out a 6-inch rusty, crooked steel nail. I keep my car very clean, so I was pretty sure I hadn't been there in the morning. I don't know anything about witchcraft or magic, and I don't believe in any of that. But my ex-girlfriend was a proud self-proclaimed witch, so I had a suspicion that it had something to do with her. I asked one of my friends to ask his girlfriend about it, and she confirmed what she thought, explaining that my ex probably used it in some sort of spell to curse me, and then left it to me to make sure it did the damage it was supposed to do. But I thought it was silly. Still, I was worried about what else the woman might do. After learning that it was definitely my ex's, I threw it in the trash. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning. Over the next week, I went through a nightmare, many parts of which are probably familiar to many. One morning, I woke up and saw a bunch of key marks on my car. Apparently, they were runes. The next day, 3 of the tires were punctured. 24 hours after that, there was a pile of broken glass and rusty nails on my door, surrounded by a dark stain on the concrete. My friend's girlfriend said it was probably a flask of war water. I don't know what that means, and I didn't really care. At one point, I even started to look at her out of the corner of my eye. Just flashes. By the time I actually turned to look at her, She had already gone around the corner or behind something and was too far away for me to do anything about it. He was as upset as he was scared. He didn't know what he was capable of, but his intentions were clearly not good. 6 days after we broke up, there was a psychotic note on my door impaled with, you guessed it, a long rusty nail. Basically, he was saying that if I didn't want to suffer the greatest torments imaginable in this life, and then suffer even more in the afterlife, I had to immediately go to his apartment, crawl at his feet, beg for forgiveness, and swear that I would become his servant completely. Really crazy stuff. Obviously, I didn't do anything. I had work the next day. I was done letting my life revolve around that immature idiot. I had just gotten my car back from the shop after getting new tires, and since she had attacked my car before, I thought she would do something else. He was right, but that was not all. When I got back to my car at the end of my shift, my heart sank. I could see it from 30 yards away. Another damn rusty and crooked 6-inch nail. But this time I'd driven it through my windshield, causing it to crack into a million pieces. Fortunately, the laminate layer held it all together, but it was totally impossible to see through it. I pulled out my phone and sat in my car to call another tow truck. But the moment I closed the door, I smelled it, my ex's perfume. And he was strong. A shiver ran down my spine at that exact moment. Instinctively, I knew she was right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw her crawling out of the back seat floor. The look of pure evil on his face, smiling, wrapped his arms around my seat in a kind of strange hug from behind, and then I realized that he was holding one of those rusty 6-inch nails in his hands, pointing at my heart, and from the glitter at the tip, it was clearly sharp. I was ready to stick it in my heart. Laughed. "You're not strong enough to nail that through my sternum with that," I said. "Shut up," he shouted. "I'm strong enough to nail it through your windshield." "Truth. Isn't that what I did? What if I stick it in one of your ribs, or why don't I get it down your throat?" "Huh, how about that, smart ass?" She brought the tip of the nail to my jugular, though at the time I didn't mind in the least. Suddenly, I was overcome with anger. My patience had run out. All I saw was red. I grabbed my keys and started my car. "What are you doing?" my ex yelled. "Don't go anywhere or I'll nail this to you." She drove the nail into my flesh and made me bleed, but I barely felt it. I switched to first gear and stepped on the gas. The nail cut the side of my neck as my ex flew backwards into the seat. She started screaming like crazy and tried to regain her balance so she could come at me. But I was already in second gear, running through the parking lot lanes, struggling to see through the broken windshield. Once I was climbing over the center console, I slammed on the brake. Suddenly, I noticed the amount of pain in my neck. But eventually, she got what she deserved and crashed into the windshield. The foil still wouldn't give way and caught her like a walnut, keeping her inside. I pulled the handbrake, got out, and then dragged the screaming maniac out of my car and threw her onto the asphalt. I sat back in my car and locked the doors, then called the police. As they came, my ex was banging on the door and trying to force his way into my car. "Look what you did to me," he shouted, pointing to his face. There was a deep wound on the right side of her face, from above her right eyebrow to the corner of her lip. When the police arrived, they arrested me and took her to the hospital. She pressed charges, and we almost went to trial. But at the last minute, the case was dismissed thanks to my lawyers, who brought to the judge's attention all the harassment she had been doing. In the end, my actions were considered self-defense. Things aren't over yet for me, unfortunately. She has found a new way to ruin my life. I am now being sued in civil court, but I believe that in the end my counterclaim will prevail. This just goes to show that you should avoid making impulsive decisions, not dating crazy people. And I guess even if you have a sharp object pointed at your throat, you should stand up as gently as possible. Story 3. When I was in college and living in dorms, most of my studying was done in the library or at the Starbucks on campus. The library was free to enter and quieter, but the Starbucks was closer to most of my classes and had coffee. Also, I could hang out with my friends at the same time. It was a popular place for that reason, and my favorite place of study as well. I had a routine of going there after class and doing everything right away to have my afternoons off. I never paid attention to what was going on around me or who was sitting in the cafeteria. my ability to concentrate was quite strong, especially with the help of caffeine and my medication for her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. However, my friends were not the same way. They were much more talkative and liked to look at people during their breaks. At the beginning of the second semester, a new person showed up in the cafeteria. If no one had mentioned it to me, I would have assumed that I had been there all year, just like anyone else. But my friends knew they had never seen this guy. At first, it seemed harmless, like any other, and was more of a new piece of potential gossip than any kind of threat. When they pointed it out to me, all I saw was another guy with a latte working on his laptop and taking notes while listening to music. My friends asked me what I thought of him, if he was cute or if I knew who he was. He was somewhat pale and a little greasy, with a weak chin, but overall he was insignificant. "He's a stranger," I said, "and quite ugly." Maybe I said it too loudly, because the noise and laughter of my friends made him look at us for just a second. I looked away and went back to work. The next day, he was there in the cafeteria again, doing exactly the same thing as the day before, writing things down in his notebook, looking at his laptop, and looking around. I didn't think anything about it. Even when I saw him every day, I went there for the entire following week. The only thing that struck me as odd was the fact that I was paying attention to that. Sure, I saw the same 50 faces there every time, but I never noticed their existence. What was it about this guy that made me pay attention to him subconsciously? I had no idea, but then again, I had more important things to do. Notes to take in class, lectures to listen to, and textbooks to read. I had a class that week that was right next to the library, so naturally afterwards I would do my study there, instead of going to the Starbucks across campus. It was nice to have a break. The tranquility was always pleasant. No one spoke in the library. Everyone was in their own world, head down and focused on their tasks. Except for that guy. About 10 minutes into my study session, I saw him sit about 10 tables away. I rolled my eyes and tried to ignore him, but he kept staring at me. Not just stares, but staring at me for a few seconds and then looking down once he saw me. By now, it seemed like she might have developed a crush on me, but I was determined not to let any guy distract me from my goals. After a few more days, he vanished into the background. The novelty wore off, and I no longer cared if I was close or not. Unfortunately, as much as I tried to ignore him, the more he appeared everywhere he went. Even on my way back to my dorm room after the 6 o'clock class that ended at 8 p.m., I was just trying to get home after a long day of school. I walked out the door of the building, and there was no one behind me except the other students in the class I had just finished, which I knew didn't contain any pale, greasy men with weak chins. But once I got down the steps and stepped onto the sidewalk, who did I see but him? At that moment, my stomach sank. I kept going, as I wanted to avoid interaction. Eventually, I found myself alone with him, still following me. I walked into the hallway of my dorm room and headed for my door, which was on the first floor. I was terrified that this disturbed man would sneak away with his ID and follow me inside. But when I got to my bedroom, I looked back. He was standing in front of the glass and staring at me. I quickly entered my bedroom and closed the door behind me. Unfortunately, my roommate wasn't there to calm me down. Claustrophobia started to take over, so I turned on some music and tried studying before bed, but I couldn't concentrate. It took me 3 hours to finish what should have only taken me 1. Finally, at 11 o'clock, I finished. I fell asleep, absolutely exhausted. I didn't even move when my roommate came home. I had some strange nightmares, but I don't remember them much. All I know is that I woke up drenched in cold sweat. But when I got out of bed, I realized something so disturbing that it changed the way I lived so many aspects of my life. There was a piece of paper stuck to my stomach because of my sweat. When I stood up, he fell to the ground. I picked it up and read it. There were only 6 words written on it. "You are a victim, an ugly one." My heart sank. My roommate asked me what was wrong, and I begged her to tell me if she had closed the door when she returned from the party she had gone to the night before. But she just shrugged. When we checked, we discovered that he had left it open when he staggered in. That could mean that the door was wide open for that stranger to sneak into our room. And for what? Just to scare me. Gradually, things began to make sense, and a twisted and sickly sense. I didn't want to understand what was happening, but I couldn't help it. I hadn't realized that they had been stalking me for the last month. That guy with the weak chin didn't even go to school. That's why he showed up in the middle of the year, and no one knew who he was, or why he couldn't enter the bedroom without following someone. All those notes he took were about my routine, maybe other girls, too, but I couldn't understand why. Was it really just because I said I was ugly? Did that send him to a month of obsession? I reported it immediately, but the university's response was insufficient. They said if you ever had a problem with it again, you should report it to the police. However, I suppose that sick man got bored of me and my university. He was never seen again. My guess is that he used us as targets for practice. In all fairness, experience has taught me to be more attentive to my surroundings and more alert to danger.